That is wicked. Oh yeah, we're looking good here. We're looking good.
Welcome back to the channel, Gearheads. That's right. It's time to bust out, well, the new channel build. We're gonna be building ourselves, essentially, a death cart. So with Sick Week right around the corner, essentially, if you're not familiar with Sick Week, it runs drag strip to drag strip throughout Florida, and there's some pretty fast cars running 5s, 6s, probably even faster than that. Who knows? There's some guys that are strapping crazy alien technology onto their stuff there, but we won't get into alien conspiracies. But essentially, we're going to enter our little death cart here into something called Sick Ward, which is for the guys who can't compete with the super fast cars, and we still have the ability to follow the guys that are actually officially competing in the event. So that's gonna run for a few days. We're gonna try to see if we can get this built in time. Well, before we get started on the Goblin build here, I wanna go ahead and thank Super Clean for providing all the degreasers. They saw how terrible I am at making messes, dropping oil, and just creating an absolute monster of myself when it comes to working on anything with oil or grease in there. So we're gonna be putting that stuff to the test as well. Since we're gonna be doing a redneck rebuild on our Goblin here, we're gonna have to keep it clean and keep it pretty. So we're gonna go ahead and get the skeleton frame, death cart, shopping cart, whatever you wanna call the cart, pushed out. We're gonna get our donor pushed in, and we're gonna go ahead and get tearing into this thing and get all the parts we need so we're not the slowest person during Sick Ward. Now that the hot rod power tour is out of the way and the T-bucket is semi-finished while we wait for parts, and I was able to secure this awesome Jack Daniels barrel here to, showcase our little plaque that we have. We can start on this hideous piece, so POS, we'll just call it that. I caught a lot of flack for buying this thing, and a lot of guys thought I was gonna actually restore it into, well, the original Cobalt SS. Yeah, that ain't happening for this. Essentially what we're gonna do, hear me out, is this motor's capable, they say, the internet police is gonna correct me on this one, the Cobalt police there, Goblin police. Like 450 horse on these LNFs. Now they are a porous block. They did have some injection issues here and there, but I'm thinking we're gonna pull the motor out, and instead of pulling it from the bottom, like they're installed, we're gonna cut right here, cut right there. We're gonna drag the motor out. We're gonna pull the AC system, all that stuff off. We're gonna go pure bare bones on this thing. And considering how the front tires look on this sucker, this thing was driven, this thing was driven hard. So I don't really have too much faith in the internals in this thing. So we may just actually, I say we just rebuild it. But we're gonna pull that. We're gonna pull the wiring harness. We're gonna pull all that fun stuff. We're gonna take this motor, as well as some very high-end Fisher-Price GM interior parts. And we're gonna slap them in this sucker here. Essentially, it's a Goblin. It's a death cart, autocross cart. Not even sure it has its own classification of what this thing is. But we're gonna take this front-wheel drive Cobalt motor, LNF, turbocharged LNF, and we're gonna make this thing rear-wheel drive. Now, if that didn't sound fun enough of having, well, not rear-wheel, mid-engine drive, it's got a manual gearbox attached to, I believe, I think a F35. I'm not too sure on that one. I'm gonna have to look that one up. So, considering these are about 1,300 to 1,400 pounds when they're done, depending on how you actually build them out. If you go bone stock, using that motor, this thing is gonna be a wild ride. This is where it gets fun, and we're going straight Los Santos chop shop on this one. I was thinking of Sawzall, but this might be a little easier, but bam, we'll cut there, and then we'll cut there. That'll give us the ability to pull that motor out. And then we don't even need the radiator. We're not keeping anything from here over, and we're only keeping some partial parts from here. The only issue is we're gonna have to dispose of the evidence, and that being this giant, ugly frame. Shit. Like butter. You can trade me spots. God damn. Get a full frame. I think I do have to say I'm not much of a fan of stripping a car. But good thing we don't need too much out of this sucker. Oh boy, I think I may have figured out why this sucker didn't start in the beginning. Well, it did, but then it stopped and then there's no OBD reading. Now this isn't going to lead to any issues, but the starter solenoid is not hooked up. So that's probably, or maybe at one point it was barely hooked up, but it looks like somebody attempted to repair that at one point. So that may be why we're getting absolutely nothing from the starter. Everything else kind of powers on, it works. Don't know if the PCM is actually reading because we have no OBD, but I'm telling you, I think that's causing some issues there. So worst case scenario, if we can't get the sucker started, which you're supposed to have it started and running before you pull it, we may just go with a standalone harness. Might be the easier route to go. There's a company out in California that makes them. So instead of going through and stripping all this and cutting it down and thinning it out, we may just go that route. It'd be a lot easier to tune, get rid of all the GM land lockout stuff, all the stuff we just don't need. Oh man, I think I see some. It's amazing how much stuff you actually have to take apart just to get the motor out of a front wheel drive vehicle. But I do see some Brembos in there. Hopefully they're not fake. Whew, that thing is torn up. I think I found out where all our ants are coming from now. This thing has a lot of them in there. Ooh, that is a real Brembo brake. It's all corroded though. Ooh, more ants. Nice. So a lot of the guys for these kits are saying that they're not using the Brembo brakes because it gives too much braking, etc., etc. But with a good proportioning valve, there's absolutely no issue with using the Brembos. The only issue is actually probably going to be the clearance. I don't know what the clearance is going to come down to, but we shall see. We'll try it out, see how it works. I'd like to kind of resurface these. These look great. And these actually go for pretty high dollar on the black market, the Cobalt black market. Nice. It's like, there we go. Let that drain a bit. We could vacuum it out, but we're gonna let it naturally come out, and then we'll pull that off. Pretty sure back in the day, this was a $1,100 upgrade, I think. Might have been more than that. With inflation now, it's probably about $4 grand a day. Those are actually pretty good. And somebody actually kept pads on it. Oop. All right, so it's been a long couple of nights, and it's taken us, well, taken me and the neighbors a little longer to actually take this thing apart. But here's what we're looking at. We got the CV axles out on both sides. There's a brand new set in the trunk, so we're not gonna reuse this. Now, this is a little different setup from the automatic ones. We had a bit of issues pulling this out. Didn't realize that there's an extension shaft, so we yoked out the whole thing on this transmission here, and then when it comes time to install it in the Goblin, we'll have to put all that back together. Now we're just about ready to pull this thing out now that we got all the doors off, and essentially what we need to do is we need to pull this bottom engine cradle. So we're going to reuse these lower control arms here. For this particular build, we're just going to get some coilovers. I'm not going to reuse these. Actually, I was taking a look at these, and it looks like somebody at some point attempted to lower this car, and they actually cut off a ring. So it was a hack job. So we're going to toss these and keep the hardware. But we need this bracket here that goes all the way around. It's kind of like a weird elongated square. And then once we pull that out, which is only held on with 4 bolts, 1, 2, and then on the other side, we can go ahead and bust out the crane here, hoist, crane, jack, lift, and try to find our lift points. Unfortunately, these LNFs, not all of them actually came with the lift rings. So normally they're mounted right here. It looks like GM may have started cutting costs when they file for bankruptcy. So we're gonna just grab our chain, run some grade 8 through those. And then I think there's another one back here, and we should be able to just unbolt it, lift it up, pull it forward, drop it on a dolly. But before we do any of that, this sucker has gotta come out. Oh boy, we're getting close now. Just waiting for the motor to fall out of the bottom, land on the concrete at any point. Come on. Oh yeah. Now that's an important part of the car right there. Whew. And we need a steering rack. So I'll tell you what, I've really been dragging on this project here. It took me like 2 days to just get to this point. I can tell you, I'm not a big fan of pulling front wheel drive motors. Too many little bolts and stuff. But once it's out, it will be golden. We'll still have a few other little things to pull out, but oops. Well, I'm not very skilled with my left hand. All right, so now that we got the motor out, we've got the engine replaced with a new powertrain, about one horsepower. Ethan, are you 1 horsepower? Are you just enough? We'll mount you in there. Got to move the interior. So the interior seats are going to come out, all that junk. And guess what? I've been listing this stuff online. Man, marketplace sucks. Everybody just kind of wants to wheel you down. And then when you finally agree to sell something for like $5, they never come get it. So dash is going to come out. We're going to disassemble the dash. Center console is going to come out. We're going to keep dragging the wiring harness from up front. Going to keep making our way back. And then all this is going to come out too. And yeah, it's all fun stuff here. So essentially, I think the hardest part's actually, well, it's not really hard, but difficult part is going to be pulling the dash. Too bad it's not an actually working car. You know, you could replace the blower at this time, and I don't know, we could probably put it back together and, nah, it's too late. All right, so we are officially ready to push this thing to the junkyard. Well, I'm gonna put it in the other garage for now until I can figure out a way to legally dispose of this thing. So wiring harness is out, dash is fully out, got everything we need, back seat, all that stuff. So we're gonna actually break into this and figure it out. I'm thinking again on that standalone harness, but we'll see how this 50 pounds of wire goes. But push this sucker out. Still haven't sold the seats though. Now we got some room to work. Still got to clear some things up and had a little bit of a oil mess here. We've already destroyed the floor in this garage, but it'll get worse. Got the Goblin frame pushed in for right now, but we're still pretty far off from that. Yeah, that wiring harness, still cringing looking at it. But we need to go ahead and strip this down. And for the dash, we're gonna need a full harness out of that. Steering column, lockout, OBD, collapsible steering shaft. We'll take the pedal box, and it's really rusted, so I think we'll go ahead and powder coat that one, make it look nice and shiny when we put it in. We won't need most of the modules off here, just some of the basic stuff, and then we can go ahead and toss that too. Now for the motor, I did pull the engine stand out of the other garage. So we'll go ahead and separate the trans too. Pull the trans off because we're going to end up checking the clutch, make sure, since a bunch of teenage kids own this thing, and that thing is probably just, I'm guessing that thing is shot. The tranny's not shot, but I'm not feeling too good about the clutch and all that other stuff. And then we'll get this thing up on an engine stand and start tearing into it. Found out we got some neighbors on the turbocharger there, so if they're on the outside, they might be in the inside. No, maybe not. I don't know. We'll find out. Was not a fun one to pull, but our friends from Super Clean came through. We're going to throw some of our Super Clean products up here, get this thing degreased and ready for our engine stand for, well, our low budget redneck rebuild, but we got to make it look somewhat pretty before we get it taken apart. We don't want to work on a dirty motor now, do we? Now I will say this thing was not fun to pull out, but I did check the serial number on here, and it's truly an LNF block 2.0 liter Ecotec, which Ecotecs now, what a terrible name for a motor. These are such great engines, and now Ecotecs, man, they are like the worst GM engine you could well, yeah, it's probably the worst GM engine you could ever possibly purchase, an Ecotec. But back in the day, these things were, and still today, they're great engines. But the water pumps were a main issue, timing chain was a main issue, timing chain guides, it just wasn't fun. And a lot of guys were having issues in the beginning. GM was actually doing a service bulletin, not quite a recall, but regarding water pump failures at around 30,000 to 60,000 miles, especially on the LNF blocks. Now getting to the water pump is pretty difficult when the engine is actually mounted in the car. You can see, well, essentially it's an internal setup, and you can access it here with your timing chain tool, hold everything in place, and do all the replacements. But getting to the back, especially the intake pipes and all that, is absolutely difficult. And considering the orientation that this was placed into the Cobalt, getting back here and working on this thing while it was in the car is almost ungodly. So we're going to take apart this, we're going to take the valve cover off, we're going to pull the head off the motor, we're going to do a little leak down test on the valves, make sure they're all going. With the direct injection on these Ecotecs, the early direct injection, they were prone to significant amount of carbon buildup, valve failure, valve spring issues. It wasn't really a good PCV valve system on these. There's a lot of carbon buildup that would happen in these, again, just with the direct injection setup and just how new it was, I guess you could say, for GM at the time. The other thing too is when the motor did run, it ran very shortly. Again, here's our neighbors here, but the turbo wasn't plugged. So I don't know if these guys showed up after it didn't work, or maybe, I don't know. So they may be internal. We'll take some of this stuff apart. We do need to pull the transmission on this. We're going to replace the clutch and all that stuff as well. I guarantee you it's burned up. I did drop a little bit of transmission fluid out of here, and it smelled really burnt. It wasn't red anymore, and it was just, well, it smelled like burnt rubber actually. Burnt rubber and asbestos. So we're going to pull that off. We do have a head gasket kit coming, so we're going to pull all this apart. We're going to swap all that out. We'll check the leak down, flip her upside down, do the hokey pokey, turn it all about, check the bottom end. Actually, there is no gasket for the pan either. It's actually GM used a kind of a glue-on gasket, but we're going to do a water pump, timing chain guides, timing chain. We're going to go ahead and eliminate the AC system on here because, again, we're an open exo car. We don't need that. And then we'll probably do a 30, 32 inch. I got to do a measurement with a string and find out what belt we need to actually to bypass this sucker here. And then I think that's about, I don't think we're going to do any pulleys or anything. We shouldn't have to do any of that. Just the main issues were timing chain and valves and all that. So we'll check all that. We'll pull all this apart. We do need to run it outside, get her all cleaned up before we take it apart. So this is everything else that was pulled off the Cobalt as well. We're going to use the bottom of the engine cradle here. That's going to go onto our Goblin build. We're going to use the same steering rack. We have some steering rack limiters. Most of this here is all wiring harness. It's going to have to be stripped down, as well as a few other parts in there, which we're going to clean all that up. And then we have our steering setup down there, pedal box, brake booster, some other fun stuff back there. So all this is going to get chopped down, cleaned up, repainted, repowder coated. Some of this stuff actually might get thrown away. I couldn't even get brake rotors off. They were so rusted on. But we got a lot of work we have to do. So what's next?